Men have a very tricky responsibility, and they have to walk down this very narrow line. And the line is between chauvinism on one side and chivalry on the other.
You're a man living in the modern world in a time when men and manhood are not what they once were. You live life on your own terms. You're self-sufficient. You think for yourself, and you march to the beat of your own drum. When life knocks you down, you get back up, because in your gut, you know that's what men do. You're a badass and a warrior. And on the days when you forget, we are here to remind you who you really are.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou. And boy, do we have an exciting guest lined up for you today. Today's guest is a dear friend of mine. He's my brother from another mother. He is a member of the most elite mastermind for thought leaders on the planet, the Transformational Leadership Council. He is one of the world's leading experts when it comes to presenting powerfully to audiences to move them to move toward their dreams. I am speaking, of course, of none other than the one, the only, the legendary Eric Edmeades. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, brother, the folks who listen to this show are seekers. They are people who want to learn, who want to grow. And they're not here for me because I'm here every week. They're here for you. But before they can open themselves to you and your wisdom, they got to get to know you. So tell us your backstory. How'd you get to be the great Eric Edmeades?
Well, I don't know about great, but the short version is I'm born in South Africa, immigrated to Canada when I was small, became Canadian at 8, went through the sort of normal trials and tribulations of growing up, alcoholism and divorce and the like. And by the age of 15, I found myself homeless on the streets of Edmonton, which I can tell you is not so much fun in January.
No.
But I took those various adversities and figured them out and navigated my way into the rest of my life. I left Canada at 25 to live in Ireland for a year, in England for 10 years, started my first business during that time in mobile computing, and sold that business some years later, and then got involved in Hollywood special effects. We worked on Avatar and Pirates and Iron Man and that sort of stuff. We did research and development for the military. And somewhere along the line, I got into teaching. And it's something I always really wanted to do. But I evaluated what speaking and teaching and influence were about before I got into the business, and decided to really make an art of it. And, since then I founded WildFit, Speaker Nation, all started really with businessfreedom.com and teaching entrepreneurship and marketing and that kind of stuff. And so now I have the great benefit of traveling around the world, meeting the most phenomenal people and teaching and enjoying myself.
I love it. I love the entire short version of the story, but let's unpack it. So,
sure.
What made you decide to leave Canada when you were 25?
Nikki, at the time, it had a lot to do with, let's say that I had developed a certain amount of resentment toward the justice system, or I don't know how to put it in Canada. There was a political correctness thing going on, and I'll tell you what happened in my case. I was involved in a really serious industrial accident. I nearly lost my right arm in a fire, and my arm had to be rebuilt from skin grafts and so on. And of course, there's the great advantage of living in a country with universal medical and so on, of course. But at the same point in time, I then found out that the Workers' Compensation Act prevented me from taking legal action for the negligence that caused my pain and my 6 weeks in the hospital and my permanent scarring and the near loss of my arm. And the same Workers' Compensation Act that prevented me from being able to take action to take legal action against the negligence also wouldn't let me even claim against workers' compensation because I was unemployable as a student, which didn't stop me paying into the workers' compensation fund. It just stopped me from collecting from it. And at 18 years old, this struck me as unbelievably unfair and what I consider to be the overreach of government. And that was amplified by waking up to the reality of paying 54% tax at the age of 25 years old. And I just I don't understand it. I'm happy to pay my fair share, but if I'm not being able to benefit from it, and if the roads look like this, and if my parents have to wait 6 months for a surgery, then this whole taxing me 54% doesn't really seem to be working out in my favor. And by the way, this is the most strongly politically worded answer I've ever given on a podcast.
Yeah, good for you.
Probably now I get banned from Canada.
Well, it's interesting that you say this, but yes, not yesterday, but over the weekend, I was watching a documentary on Netflix about the mafia in Canada, and they were talking about the Comiso family, crime family, which is an infamous crime family here in the Toronto area where I live, and the fact that in the 80s they were having this kind of head-to-head competition with another family, the Volpe family. Now, in the 80s, I'd just come to Canada. My father had opened up a tanning salon in 1983. Shortly after we got there, Paul Volpe was murdered and his body was stuffed in a trunk. I don't know if you were here at that time when all that happened, but it was a huge news. Now, I'm 17 years old. I'm in 16 when this happened, 17 when I start working in my dad's tanning salon. And Frank Volpe, Paul Volpe's brother, walks in the door. And he looked like Paul Volpe, and I'm going, oh my God, this guy looks like a mafioso, like a caricature of a Hollywood mafioso. And he walked in and he said, I'm Frank Volpe, and I'm a friend of your father's, blah, 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 blah. My dad goes, yeah, let's treat these guys good, blah, you know what I mean? And I'm watching this documentary, and they were talking about a major sting that they pulled to try and get some of these Canadian-based mafia families put away. And they talked about the fact that it failed. So these guys, the Comiso brothers, the Filomeno family, they've never been successfully prosecuted in Canada. And you were talking about the lack of the justice system. Well, Canada has never passed laws to make it easy to go after mafia kingpins. The U.S. has the RICO Act, the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act. So they use that to take down the 5 families in New York. In Italy, there's a Mafia Association Act. So if you associate with no mafia members, they can arrest you and put you in jail. But there's nothing like that in Canada. And as a result, Canada is a place.
Meanwhile, Canada has ample legislation to take non-custodial parents, treat like third-class citizens, and put them into indentured servitude for the rest of life and deny them access to their children. There are definitely some things. There's legislation right now being pulled in Canada. I can't remember the bill number at the moment. If it comes to me, I'll share it with you. But there's legislation happening right now that is designed to basically, I don't know how to put this. It's under the guise of family welfare and what have you, but it's stripping even more rights away from non-custodial parents and basically subjecting them to guilt before prosecution. In other words, an accusation stands and now affects everything, just an accusation. And then equally, they're trying to strip away one of the worst forms of child abuse that exists, which is parental alienation. They're trying to dumb it down so that parental alienation can't be, it won't carry weight in the family court situation, which of course heavily favors custodial parents who use parental alienation to brainwash their children to move, like this whole thing is happening right now, and it's a complete, I don't know how else to put it, but it's almost like it's designed to break up families, and certainly designed to unfairly treat the non-custodial parents, which of course on the average turns out to be fathers.
Yeah, most of the time it's fathers. I've got a friend of mine here who's a very successful businessman, has founded and exited 2 software companies, one of them for over $1 billion, and he's going through a nasty divorce, and his wife is determined to make him suffer by alienating him from the kids. Now the kids basically say, we don't have anything to do with you, Dad. They don't even talk to him. And that's awful for them. I mean, to alienate a child from a parent, they're 50% of that parent. It's the worst thing someone can do. And I agree with you. The governments here in Canada are politically correct, quasi-Marxist in their approach to family, which means they don't value family at all. And they're not good for children. They're not good for fathers. They're not good for mothers. I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's
Nikki,
a
I'll
horrible
tell
thing.
you, alienation is something that I really hadn't given a great deal of thought to. I'd heard the expression. I vaguely knew that it was a thing. But I've done a lot more research into it. And when I say that it's one of the worst forms of child abuse, I really mean that it is. And one of the reasons is that overt physical child abuse results in flinching and bruises and injury that eventually can get spotted by teachers and counselors and other parents and what have you. But parental alienation leaves scars and bruises that are inside the child that are not overtly visible. And what they do is they seek to write into a child's belief systems that then affects the child's view of every interaction they have. So if you can imagine a parent in a very real sense hypnotizing the child, and it is in a sense a form of hypnosis, hypnotizing the child to believe that the other parent is not honest, just that, like they're just not honest, then the child will hear statements from that other parent through the assumption of lack of honesty, which will then become self-fulfilling belief of lack of honesty, which will support the original lie. And what ends up happening is, and there are some just awful cases of this, where children have been indoctrinated completely away from their parent. And I will say, since we've gone a little political here, one of the challenges I think that we have is that, in a very real sense, the father, in this case, a father is competing almost directly against the government in this situation, because if the father were to win at least equal custody, the requirement for financial support of the child would be you wouldn't be paying child support anymore because it's 50-50. And that would mean that the other parent might then make a petition to the government for additional financial help. So they would rather put that burden on the father or on the non-custodial parent, which on the average ends up being a father. So there are all kinds of just pernicious and just, I won't go too much more into detail than to say this. I will simply say that I've spent the last couple of years defending a spousal support claim in Canada for $250,000 to a woman that I was married to for a few years, who didn't give up her career, who didn't, give up her career, who unlawfully removed my child from my care, and then decided that I was supposed to have paid 30 years of child support. I'm not kidding you that the burden is on me to defend that. And that's Canada. And so you've opened a can of worms on why I've left, and maybe I won't be coming back anytime soon.
Well, brother, I brought you on to speak on my business podcast, but I might take a piece of this and put it on.
This is what happened to Jordan Peterson.
No. I have a men's podcast. You and I talked about this when we saw each other in the summer. In addition to my business work, I went through a rough divorce myself and all that stuff. And I run a men's organization, and it's all about uplifting men, manhood, and masculinity. And everything you're saying, I'm 100% in agreement with. And honestly, offline, I can connect you with, there is an organization in Canada that publicly advocates for fathers' rights, publicly advocates for...
I would love to do that. By the way, one thing that's happened to me as a result of two different situations that I've gone through is I have typically suffered through these things alone. In fact, the truth is Jordan Peterson managed to pull out of me a little bit. He kind of did a bit of a psych profile interview on me, and he managed to get me to talk a bit about this. And that's actually what created this action against me, because of anger and just for being honest. And I have since made the decision that as a speaker and as a person of influence, it is ridiculous that I have now, since I've been going through this stuff, I've bumped into so many men that are suffering, and women too, by the way, so many parents, non-custodial parents, that are suffering at the hands of a disastrous and dishonest and often corrupt family court system. So if there's an advocacy group that, first of all, I could get help from, but secondly, I'm up for helping. I've already contacted there's a really great production being made right now called Love versus the Law. And wow. the guy that's making that, it's really evaluating the family court systems, not just in the UK where he's based, but around the world. And this is it's a big topic. So maybe on your men's podcast we go a little deeper. And I certainly would love to be connected with the advocacy group you mentioned.
I'll do. And both.
By the way, we'll talk about Bill 223. That's the bill we should discuss.
Let's do that, 100%. And I'll connect you with those people. I'll connect you with my friend, the software founder, because his story will make your hair curl too. I'm sure it's ridiculous what they've done to him. Myself, I was able to. I got when this when I was going through my situation and my ex-wife kind of seemingly out of the blue decided she didn't want to be with me, I just couldn't understand why she was taking steps that I felt were not in the kid's best interest, not 100% honest. And I got really angry. And I joined a men's group in Toronto, run by a man named Owen Williams, who now has moved to Vancouver Island. Owen Williams is the most interesting individual when it comes to this work because God has a sense of humor about certain things, right? They used to say he made the best rapper in the world a white guy. He made the best golfer in the world a black guy.
Even 50 centigrades.
Yeah,
even 50 centigrades.
Yeah, that's right. He made the best golfer in the world a black guy, and he made the best heterosexual marriage counselor in the world a gay guy. So that's Owen, and Owen.
And Dan Savage. By the way, same story.
Same story. Well, there you go. So Owen was not able to get me to get past my anger to the point where we put our marriage back together, but he got us past the anger that we had toward each other, that we stopped trying to hurt each other, and our kids are doing supremely well as a result. So me and my ex have gone on vacation with my two children when they were younger, and my new girlfriend, Teresa, who you met in the summer.
Yeah.
And on top of that, both my boys are thriving. My 19-year-old son decided not to go to university, so he's working as a fitness coach. He works 90 hours a week, 7 days a week. He loves what he's doing. He's not dependent on us financially. He's making his own money. God bless him. And my 17-year-old, he's in grade 12. He's an A student. He's plays sports. They're both thriving. And I think a big reason is because none of this parental alienation bullshit got into the mix, and it easily could have. It easily could have.
Nikki, it's so important. And I'm living in this bizarre world where I live between the two extremes. And what I mean by that is that I've remarried, and my wife, she and her husband, when they split up, it was tough initially, but they made a pledge and a commitment that the children would be at the forefront of every decision they made. My ex-wife and I said that we were going to do that, but she kind of didn't go down that path in the same way. So here's the bizarre part. We are such good friends with her ex and his new wife. We went to their wedding as special guests. They sent a limousine to pick us up, and they came to our wedding. They've come and vacationed at our house in Dominican Republic. We're going to have Christmas dinner with them in a couple of nights. And when I've had to defend myself in family court, the father of my stepdaughters wrote the character, reference for me as a great father to his children, right? Like that.
Wow.
That's on the one side of my life. And then on the other side of life, I have exactly the opposite extreme. And so it's really, and that's one of the reasons that I've made the decision to kind of step into a little bit more advocacy about these things, because I now recognize how prolific it is, how many people are suffering. I read years ago, as I first got into this, that the rate of suicide among men in British Columbia is among the highest in the world, and it's heavily attributed to family courts.
Jesus Christ. The rate of suicide among men compared to women is 6 times higher. Six times higher. I mean, that's insane if you think about it.
Yeah.
On the face of it. And it all starts after they turn 15. So suicide among 15 and younger is equal between the two sexes, although it's crazy to me that anybody under 15 would want to kill themselves at all. But the way the world is attacking men, manhood, masculinity is awful. They're trying to make little boys feel bad just for being boys, just for being born male. And
we're totally not going to get to the business podcast today, are we?
Oh my God. I guess we'll switch.
But I'm telling, I totally agree with you. I really, and here's the crazy bit. You remember, that old song, "Where Have All the Cowboys Gone"?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
Where have they gone? Well, they've been told not to be, they've been told not to be this and not to be that. They've been told not to initiate, like if you really think of the dating game, it has always traditionally been that game is initiated by men. You ask for the first date, you try for the first kiss, you're the one who puts your arm around her shoulder in the movies for the first time. It's all about initiation. And all of a sudden that is called unwanted sexual advance. And you wonder why there's by the way, I want to be really clear. Of course, unwanted sexual advances are wrong, but we're at this point where we've so blurred the lines. In fact, the way I often think about this is men have a very tricky responsibility, and they have to walk down this very narrow line, and the line is between chauvinism on one side and chivalry on the other. And the problem with the line is that it moves decade by decade. And so, for example, where the line was between chivalry and chauvinism in the 60s, I think we can all agree now is deep in chauvinism category. But equally, something happened in the 80s where it moved so far the other way that we started to lose any sense of proper masculinity. And I think in a sense, as much as men are victims of that, so are women, because they're out there going, where do I find a man who's, going to be a man in my life?
Well, he was emasculated, and he's being told if he's that way, he could go to jail. That's the problem. And I got to tell you, I used to agree wholeheartedly with what you said about the line between chauvinism and chivalry. But today, I think the whole concept of chauvinism is a concept that was created by those that wanted to break up the family in order to get men to feel bad and feel guilty and back away from their traditional protector provider role. So this whole thing that's happened in Western society is a result of a decades-long plan that was originated in the old Soviet Union in 1917. 1917, the communists overthrew the Romanov dynasty in Russia. They killed off the royal family, and Vladimir Lenin became the ruler of the new Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. He had a plan to create a one-world communist government. That was his vision. But he realized that Soviet Russia was way too weak to take on the capitalist West in a military confrontation and win. So he decided that what he was going to do was use the West's very openness against itself. So he had a man who was one of his close aides, a German communist named Willy Münzenberg, and he went to Münzenberg and said, I'm sending you to the United States of America. The main adversary was what they called the United States. And what I want you to do is I want you to seed a decades-long plan to weaken them from within. I want you to weaken the school system, turn the schools against the values of Americanism. I want you to weaken the family structure, turn families against themselves. I want you to weaken news media, so the news media goes against the principles of Americanism and their way of life. And I want you to weaken the nascent industry of entertainment, movies, storytelling. And if you look at it, up until the early 60s, for the most part, American education was patriotic. If you look at textbooks in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, they were very much patriotically based. But 60s come around and they start questioning, what the West is all about, what America's all about. Same with families. And the attack on the family was, let's start getting women to feel that they're being oppressed. They're actually being oppressed. And let's get everyone to believe this over time. And they've been super successful. Because I got to tell you, I'm from Iran, as you know, originally. And my father was a great, big, larger-than-life character. He looked like Omar Sharif. He was very cultured, articulate, strong, tough. The kind of guy who, was equally at home with his fists in a bar as he was in a boardroom, right? And everybody, who would look at my mom and dad would go, oh, yeah, your dad wears the pants in the family. Really? Well, let me tell you a little bit about how my family ran, Eric. So my mom decided where we lived. She told my dad, you're going to build us a house in this area of town. And he did it. When the Iranian Revolution happened, my mom said, we got to get out of here. We need to go to the West. I want to go to Canada. Dad made all that happen. My mom said, I want the kids to go to an American school so they're educated in both English and Farsi. Dad made all that happen. Everything in our family was done at the behest of what my mom thought was best, not what my dad thought was best. So in public, everybody thinks, oh my God, this is the little woman, Napoleon Baloo, and he had this regal name, Napoleon, right? So everyone's got all this handled. But the reality was that my mom basically ran the whole family. And this was not an exceptional situation in Iran. This was every family. In public, the men looked like they ran everything, but in private, the women ran the world.
I listen, Nikki, I don't think that that's unusual to Iran or anywhere. I think that
It isn't.
yeah, one of the difficulties I have when people talk about this, evil patriarchy, is that patriarchy makes it a gendered issue. And I think it had a lot more to do with a family structured issue. And, let's say, for example, there were some very powerful families that, the Rockefellers and others that say, let's say they established capitalistic ideals that maybe weren't perfect in many ways and maybe allowed them to amass tremendous amounts of wealth in an unfair way, let's say. But they call that like a patriarchal problem, like a man problem. Tell me there wasn't a powerful patriarch at the head of families. And that's something that hasn't really been discussed about this whole idea of patriarchy. Is like, here's an interesting question. And again, we're not on your business podcast or on your men's podcast,
we're not.
But
we'll switch it next time.
Quality of life. Yeah, whose quality of life was more difficult under, quote, the patriarchy. At the top of the patriarchy, yeah, there were some very rich, entitled, wealthy men, and their women, many of whom ran their families in a matriarchal sense. But now, as you look down into the patriarchy, who really suffered? Men die at work 6 times more often than women do. They work in the cold. They lay the bricks. Like the patriarchy sucked for men, and so calling it that allows a present day disrespect toward all men, and I find that to be difficult.
Absolutely. It's important that we understand that this did not happen by accident. This was a design that was brought into Western society very successfully, I may add, that even though the Soviet Union as an entity disappeared and dissolved, the plan they put into motion was only too successful in getting the West to turn against itself. And a big part of that...
I don't really want to go so deep into politics, but I can't help but say this. Have you ever seen this new Animal Farm movie?
No, I haven't.
Oh, Nikki, I'm sure you've read Animal Farm.
I have.
I mean, just based on the way you think, I imagine you would, and you probably read 1984. Now,
I did.
Now, Animal Farm, of course, was banned in many places because it was such a strong critique of communism and so on. There's a new Animal Farm movie, the same characters, Animal Farm, only it's completely flipped. It's anti-capitalism.
Really?
They've taken Orwell's book and they've turned it. Now, listen, don't get me wrong. I totally agree that there are problems with capitalism. I'm under no illusion. I believe that the medical system and pharma and food production under capitalist systems are disastrous for human beings. So I'm not, but I also believe that communism is disastrous across the board. And so here we had a movie that warned us and showed us the patterns, that showed us what it means to say that the pigs are walking. Only they've recast the pigs as the industrialists that are building the very technology that we're having this conversation on, that are building the very, electric cars that are reducing our dependency on fossil fuels, that are changing the world. And so what's going to happen now is a whole generation of children are going to grow up reading the opposite of what Orwell wrote. All part of this sort of constructionist rubbish that we're living through.
Yeah.
So
well,
again,
one of my professors in school said the problem with capitalism are some capitalists are not nice people, and they'll do whatever they have to do to amass power for themselves and oppress people if they have to. That's the problem. But he also said there's a lot of good capitalists out there that actually want to make the world a better place. The problem with socialism is socialism. Everything about socialism, even in the hands of people with the best intentions, is going to make everybody's life miserable. And I thought that was quite true.
I was in a little debate with somebody on Twitter X the other day, and we were talking a little bit about this, and they were saying, well, capitalism created poverty. Capitalism created poverty. And so, of course, me, I do a lot of my work based on evolutionary history and human history and what have you. And I said, well, actually, no, poverty is the base state of humanity. You are born into poverty. Everybody in nature, you wake up in the morning and you're poor. you don't have food, you don't have water, you don't have resources. You wake up in the morning and you're poor. An elephant wakes up in the morning and it's poor. And so does a baboon, and so does a leopard, and so did early humans. We woke up poor. Then we had to get up and go do some stuff. We had to undertake stuff, which is what entrepreneurship means, translated, right? Like undertaking of things. We had to go and walk and pick and berries and hunt and dig things up. And then we ended our poverty for the day. And then we woke up the next morning in poverty again. And it was only through the undertaking or entrepreneurship of people that developed systems like better methods of hunting, like tool development and bows and arrows, and then systems of agriculture, that these forms of innovation came along that allowed us to open the window of wealth up wider so that there could be less overall poverty. And of course, the message here being is that capitalism doesn't create poverty, but it certainly magnifies it.
Yeah, but capitalism as a system, I think I would argue, has taken more people out of poverty than any other system that human beings have invented. And while it's imperfect, as you said, and it is imperfect, there's no perfect system anywhere. It is the least imperfect system that exists. And if we had in Canada, for example, a purer form of capitalism and less of this Marxist-infected governmental policy that decides to social engineer around things like families, I believe more people in this country would be better off, and there wouldn't be a brain drain of people like you. I mean, Canada is poorer because you decided to leave, and you're not the only one. There's tens of thousands of high-performing individuals who don't want to be here anymore. That's not good for this country's long-term future.
Yeah, I agree. If I owned stock in it, I wouldn't be holding it at the moment. I don't. Listen, Canada's a great country, and the Canadian people are some of the best people in the world, in my opinion. I'm a huge fan of the country, and I believe that what has happened in North America over the last 5 years is a devastating tearing at the social fabric of North America by extremists on both ends of the political spectrum. And I find it really sad. I find it sad that I go to Canada and I have friends that lower their voice to talk about what they feel and what they're afraid of because they're now afraid of retribution. They're afraid that they're going to lose friends. And Canada used to be much, at least in my experience, much more like we can talk about anything around the table to get to some idea and to refine our ideas and to arrive at conclusions. And it's I think what's happening now is I'll give you a really good example, a very practical example.
Sure.
I'm sure you're familiar with the McCarthyism of the American history, but for those who are listening, they might be younger and don't know. McCarthy basically, created this system where if he didn't like you, then he didn't like your ideas. If you opposed him or opposed what he wanted to put forward, then all he had to do is suggest that you might be a communist. And once you were, suggested as a member of the Red Menace, then you couldn't get speaking engagements. Your university studies would no longer get funding. You wouldn't get keynote speaking gigs. Like you were basically canceled. You were taken out. And this was done to Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was kicked out of America for years. He returned to America finally when it was over, and he went to the Oscars and he received a 12-minute standing ovation, the longest in the history of the Oscars. And this followed his exile by McCarthyism. The same thing was done to Martin Luther King. Neither of these men were communists, and they were both branded as communists in order to shut them down. What I've been witnessing and what I've been watching, sadly, in America is that now, if you say, for example, you express a concern about clustered vaccines, like you're not against vaccines, but you're just wondering, should I take that many in such a should I subject my children to that many that quickly when we didn't do that 30 years ago? The minute you ask that question, anti-vaxxer. You're an anti-vaxxer scumbag, and you get canceled off social media, and your voice is on. And meantime, somebody else says, I'm not really sure about this whole gender fluidity thing, but one thing I do think is that in the same way that we won't let children get a tattoo until they're age of majority, we probably shouldn't let them undertake, permanent medical treatments and drug treatments. You're transphobic. And you suddenly take this label. That's not transphobic. That's not transphobic means literally means to be phobic of transgendered people. That means that you shake in fear when you see them. The same thing, like, so you see now what's happened is we throw these labels at people. You're a misogynist. You're a racist because you've expressed something in the way they didn't like it, and we shut conversation down. And that, I think, is one of the saddest things that's happening in culture at the moment.
Well, that's the new McCarthyism, and I actually think it's a lot more insidious than McCarthyism back then. Joe McCarthy had some supporters back then, but honestly, what he was saying when he went out there was, I have a concern that there's been a number of people that have infiltrated the U.S. government that may not be loyal to us. They may be spying for the other side. And this came out of the whole Alger Hiss case. And Alger Hiss was a senior State Department official that a man by the name of Whittaker Chambers, who was a member of the Communist Party, who decided to leave the Communist Party and become a Christian, said, hey, this guy was in the same Communist Party cadre as me, and he denied it. And there was this huge trial. It became the trial of the century. And Richard Nixon was the prosecuting congressman who acted like a prosecuting attorney. And basically, Alger Hiss was saying, no, I'm not a communist. And he called Chambers a liar. But at the end of the day, Chambers was convicted of perjury. And that's when all that Red Scare stuff started to come, because it was politically advantageous. But the concerns were real. The guy took it too far, and he was a drunk, and, he died of alcoholism and all that, but he disappeared. And everybody looks at that and rightly says that was not good. But today, what's happening is, if you have these opinions, as you said, that are politically incorrect, but are just common sense, you can be unpersoned. You can be debanked. You can be taken out of movies. I've got a friend of mine who was a very successful movie actor, okay? And as soon as he came out with some of these opinions that you and I talked about, he stopped getting roles, which is crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. And this guy was in movies with Brad Pitt. He was in that show, The Walking Dead. He's a real deal guy. Now he's got a podcast, he's doing other things, but it's crazy that that's happened. And there's a lot of people that are censoring themselves, as you said, because they're afraid that if they get out there and they speak, they're going to be canceled. And what I think is a little bit hopeful is, since, and again, not to make a political judgment one way or another, but since in the United States, Donald Trump won the election, he put Bobby Kennedy in charge of Health and Human Services, there's a lot of debate that's happening around issues with children and with health. And Kennedy seems to, be willing to go up against the established narrative. And some of these pharmaceutical companies are backing down because they know if they push him too hard, he can cause them real damage. He can cause their businesses real damage. So for that, I'm grateful. But as a society, we need to see that this is what happened. We need to start to go, we got to come back to the principles of Western civilization, free thought, open debate, free speech, because those are the things that basically made us great, made us be able to flourish, made us be able to come up with bright lights like you, Eric, and like other people that you and I know that have helped make the world a better place. I got to tell you, I was looking forward to speaking to you today, and I was looking forward to learning from you today in the business field. I hope you'll come back and we'll do a business conversation with the next time I bring you on early in the new year, because I still want to get all that information out to people. But it honors me that you're here and sharing this, but it also saddens me that if even a man of your stature can be in the crosshairs of these intolerant ideas and these intolerant movements, the rest of us are going to need to gird our loins and be prepared to stand up for what matters. Because if we don't, I think in 10 years, Western civilization, as Nikki, and I know it, won't exist.
It's if you're afraid to say something needs to be said, there's a problem. And that's just a general truth. I am a free speech absolutist. I don't believe the government should be infringing on people's speech at all. But I also understand that free speech comes with consequence. And freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence.
No.
And but I do see an opportunity at the moment for a move in the right direction. And I'm going to give you one good example of that.
Please.
On December 2nd, the city of San Francisco filed a very serious lawsuit against the 10 largest food manufacturers or 10 of the largest food manufacturers in America, including Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Kellogg's, and Kraft, and some others.
Good.
And they sued them, not simply in the way that you might have expected, that we're suing you because you've caused this widespread obesity, and diabetes pandemic. But they sued them for some principles that I was really surprised by. Not surprised by the principles, I wrote about them. Yeah, matter of fact, I had a book come out about a month and a half ago called The Wild Fit Way, which is a discussion of the principles behind one of my companies that does nutrition coaching and food psychology coaching for people. And in the book, I said some pretty ballsy stuff, and I was a little bit afraid about whether or not my publisher would let me say it the way I said it. But I talked about the abuses of the food industry. I talked about the tobacco industry, the harms of the tobacco industry, and then the tobacco industry divesting and moving into the big food industry and bringing their manipulative formulations and marketing and so forth into the food industry. And I specifically said in the book something actually that I thought might get edited out. And that was that I believe that it was the food industry that made the COVID-19 pandemic possible in the first place, because an otherwise non-eventful virus, and not a particularly virulent virus, came into society and was devastating to us because we were sick, because so many of us were obese, and because so many of us were diabetic and had autoimmune conditions, created, of course, largely by the food industry. And I put that in the book, and I just to what you were saying about, even if somebody like me, well, yeah, if you're standing up for what's right, there's going to be somebody standing for what's wrong. And I was a little concerned about that. But 2 months after my book comes out, there's a kind of a huge vindication when this lawsuit comes out, and it doesn't simply go after them for the obvious things like obesity, diabetes. It specifically speaks about the use of the tobacco industry model of marketing and addictive substances and so forth. And it specifically says that they damaged the public health sufficient to cause the pandemic, or to amplify the negative, or amplify the negative effects of the pandemic. Now, some people might look at this lawsuit and go, oh, whatever, right? Whatever lawsuit, but it's just the city of San Francisco. What does that matter? If the city of San Francisco sued them. But what many people don't realize is that the city of San Francisco actually was, their legal team was actually responsible for some of the earliest lawsuits against big tobacco.
Really?
They started it. Yeah. So that they've done it again now, it really, to me, says that it's the beginning. It's like big things are going to happen in this lawsuit is a big part of that.
That's a fantastic thing. I'm going to look into this, and I want to get a copy of your book. You know what, Eric? If you're up for it, I would love to interview you a couple more times. One is I want to have a business conversation with you, and two is I'd love to have this nutrition conversation. I'm going to buy your book, read the whole thing, and then interview you on the book, and then let's help us promote it from speaking about the book, because I think this is a message that's got to go further and wider than it currently is going. So what do you say? Should we do that?
Nikki, of course. I mean, it's all schedule dependent, as you know. But I'd love to have a follow up with you. We'll fit it in if we can. That'd be great.
That's fantastic. Well, I also think that what's happening in the MAHA movement with Bobby Kennedy is good, because even though Canada is not going down the same road as the United States right now in terms of banning some of these additives, there is a lot of attention that's being given to what's going on. And many Canadians are starting to put pressure on the government. And I think in the long run, that's going to be a good thing. And I think globally, if the United States follows through with the changes that Bobby Kennedy is bringing about, like getting rid of these food dyes from processed foods, talking about having fewer processed foods as part of the diet, doing crazy things like having like a chin-up bar in airports. I think that's a great idea. There's people that are saying this is a joke. Why are you having a chin-up bar in airports? But I'll tell you what, man, if I'm waiting for a flight, right, and I got time to kill, what the hell? Let's go do chin-ups. Let's go do a bunch of push-ups. It's better than sitting there and doom scrolling on your phone all day long, right?
Yeah. Nikki, I think one of the things that's become really difficult in the political arena is that, you like your guy and I like my guy. Okay, so here we are. We're on different sides of the political fence, let's say. I like my guy, you like your guy. Now, to get me on your side, what you're going to try and do is say my guy is bad, my guy's a liar, my guy's a cheat. You're gonna say all the negative stuff. Now, I want to point out that that kind of stuff's been happening in politics for a very long time, but it's gone particularly nasty and dark over the last decade or so, or last 2 decades. I want to remind you of the debates between, say, Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale, where the interviewer says to Ronald Reagan, well, Mr. Reagan, I'm aware that if you are elected as president, you will be the oldest elected president in the history of the United States. And given the long nights that John F. Kennedy went through during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I wonder if you'll have the stamina to be able to handle those types of things. And how do you feel about that? And he says, well, I made it a position of myself at the beginning of this campaign that I would not make age an issue of the campaign. I will not use for political purposes the youth and inexperience of my opponent.
Great. That was awesome.
Walter Mondale busts out laughing. Yeah. Like there, there was a level of discourse and respect. But now you have to get me to hate my guy, and I have to get you to hate your guy. Yeah. Then the election is over, and my guy won. Now what you're going to do is fight my guy or my woman. You're going to fight my party and try to prevent them from getting anything done, even if it's stuff you agree with. Even if you agree with it, so you can prove that you were right. And I'll give you an example of this. I'm no Trump fan. I equally was no Biden fan. So there you go, whatever, right? I believe that America could be choosing a better set of choices to begin with. But what I've seen is now you've got RFK doing all this movement in the food area.
Which is great.
And what's happening is that you have all these people attacking him because they hate Trump. And it's on principle. I have not seen this kind of positive movement in the food industry in any country since this has happened. Exactly. Now, I don't like some of the things that Trump talks about. I hate what he said today about Rob Reiner. I think he's disgusting. I think it's absolutely disgusting, just like it was disgusting when people said stuff like that about Charlie Kirk. Disgusting, both sides. But that doesn't change that I agree with some of the moves that RFK is making, including putting chin-up bars and gyms in an airport and changing food regulation. But the problem we have now is even when they're doing something good that you would agree with, you can't get behind that. I don't know how you turn the ship around when we've gotten to that point.
Well, Eric, I got to tell you, more people of your stature in your field should be willing to have these types of conversations, because many people say to me, don't even bring something remotely political or public policy into the conversation because I don't want to talk about it. I have opinions, but I don't want to be associated with it. I'm like, okay, if that's the case, fine. I'll obviously, of course, respect your views, right? But as a society, I feel that's not helpful, because if the smartest, the best, the brightest of our society aren't willing to take stands, how the hell are we going to convince the average Joe to take a stand?
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I respect somebody's right to maintain space. Like if you go to a BNI meeting, they just don't do politics. And guess what? That's not what the meeting is for. No issue there at all. But when somebody creates a no politics rule in their entire life and they check out from the whole thing, I have to ask about the why. And if they give me one answer, I'm with them. If they give me the other, I'm not. And here's the one answer I'm with. It's all theater anyway. And you're at the stage now where there's almost nothing you as an individual person can do. It's almost like is an illusion. And so you may as well check out of the political conversation and go on with your life. I have a level of respect for that answer. But the other answer of I can't talk because I don't want to lose my friends, that's frightening.
That is frightening. And honestly, I'll talk to you offline about that, because there's something I don't want to say publicly around that. But I have lost.
There you go. Exactly what I just said.
Yeah, but look, I'm not worried about losing friends. I'm right of center. I'm well right of center, right? I've never made any bones about that. I've lost friends. I've lost clients. I had a client of mine come up to me, and this is a guy I made a lot of money for. And in the middle of a contract with me, he said, I'm out. And I said, what are you talking about? We have a contract. What's going on? He said, well, I noticed you said something nice about Donald Trump, and I hate Donald Trump, and that means you and we can't do business together. I'm like, are you serious? Like, we like each other?
Nikki, I had something similar. Yeah, I had something similar. I was sitting with a group of friends, and they're very, very, and I've typically spent most of my life a little left of center. That's typically where I've been. And I'm sitting around with a group of my friends, and something is brought up about Trump and what have you. And I've met Trump, so I have my own personal opinion that's not really political. But then I said I have to say that the preventing of biological men going into women's changing areas and stuff, I have to agree with him about that. Like, I can disagree with his environmental policy all day long. I can disagree with so many of the things he says, but I happen to agree with that. The minute I said that, two of the people in the group basically just shunned me because I had one point of agreement. And I'm like, holy, if you don't recognize that mediation and negotiation and arriving at truth is actually about seeking agreement where possible and building upon it, well, if you're going to cut somebody off because they found that one point of agreement, then you're not going to get anywhere.
I agree with you 100%. And we need to be able to speak about this. And look, I'm not afraid of talking about this. I'm very public about it. I know it's cost me, but it's also attracted people to me that otherwise I'd never be able to attract. I wrote two books with Wayne Allen Root, who is a big radio talk show host and TV host. And as a result of that, one of my books got the attention of Donald Trump, the one that I wrote with Wayne, and he endorsed it. So, I mean, he doesn't know who the hell I am, but his name is endorsed by Donald Trump on one of my books. Now, half the world is going to hate me for that, but half the world is going to go, cool, right? So,
yeah, there you go.
There you go, and I'm okay with it. But there's some things just for reasons of not causing harm to other people, I'll just speak about them privately rather than publicly. But I really believe that men today need to have the courage of their convictions. And I'm going to call this episode The Courage of Your Convictions. We'll put it on the men's podcast, even though I made the introduction for the business podcast. We'll have to figure out a way around that. Eric, I got to tell you, I love you. You're a great human being. I always learn from speaking to you, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you having me so much. It's been a pleasure.
You bet. And that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to the Sovereign Man Podcast. If you're ready to take charge of your life and become the man you've always wanted to be, we invite you to join the movement at sovereignman.ca.